The email arrived while I was still in my robe, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug I hadn't lifted to my lips yet. 14 lines. My son had written 14 careful, quiet lines to explain why I wouldn't be attending his wedding. He said the venue had a strict guest capacity. He said the caterer had already finalized the head count. He said he hoped I would understand that we'd celebrate together afterward, just the three of us, something intimate. He said a lot of things that sounded reasonable if you read them fast enough. What he did not say, not in any of those 14 lines, was that he was sorry. I read the email 3 times standing at the counter. Then I set my phone face down beside the sink and went to sit in the old wingback chair by the window. Outside, the oak tree in the front yard had started turning. Just the edges, a thin border of orange around the green, like a warning you noticed too late. I'm 64 years old. I taught 3rd grade for 31 years in this town. I buried my husband 6 years ago in the little cemetery on Aldrich Road, and I have kept going every day since without making it anyone's problem. I know something about quiet endurance, but sitting in that chair with my coffee going cold on the side table, I couldn't find the place inside me where the endurance lived. My son Adrian was getting married in 3 weeks to a woman named Brooke, whom I had met exactly 4 times. 4 times in 2 years, including one Christmas dinner where she spent most of the evening photographing the centerpiece she'd brought and explaining to me that the plates I'd used since 1987 had what she called a very retro energy. I'd smiled and said, "Thank you," because I didn't know what else to say. I thought of the quilt. I'd started it in February, the month after Adrian told me about the engagement. A double wedding ring pattern, the same one my mother had made for my husband and me. The same one her mother had made before that. It had taken 8 months. I'd driven 40 minutes each way, 3 separate times to find the right fabric. Deep ivory for the rings, pale blue for the background, a soft green threading through that matched nothing in particular, but felt right. When I finished it in October, I'd wrapped it in tissue paper and set it in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, waiting for the right moment. I went to the bedroom and opened the chest. The quilt was still there, folded neatly, smelling of cedar and all those months of careful evenings. I touched the corner of it and didn't pick it up. I didn't cry, not that day. The week that followed moved the way time moves when you're holding something you don't know what to do with. Too slowly and not slowly enough. My neighbor Carol called to ask if I'd gotten her invitation to the reception. She was going. Of course she was. She mentioned the venue name, some lakeside lodge 2 hours north, and I said I'd heard it was lovely. I hadn't heard anything about it at all. 2 days before the wedding, I drove to the craft store on Route 9. Not for anything specific, just to be somewhere that wasn't my house. I was standing in the ribbon aisle, not looking at anything, when a woman's voice behind me said, "You look like someone just canceled something important on you." I turned. She was maybe 40, dark hair with a streak of silver at the temple, wearing a coat that had seen better decades. She held a spool of cream ribbon and watched me with an expression that wasn't pitying exactly, just direct. "My son's wedding," I said, and immediately wondered why I'd told a stranger. She absorbed that without blinking. Then she said, "Brooke's wedding?" I stared at her. "You know Brooke?" "She's my sister." She extended her hand, "Joanna." We stood in the ribbon aisle for a moment, the way you stand when the ground shifts unexpectedly under you, and you're not sure yet which way to step. It turned out Joanna had also received a politely worded message, hers from Brooke directly. The guest list was tight. Things were complicated right now, given Joanna's divorce. Brooke thought it would be better if her older sister sat this one out. She'd said it in a text, not even an email. 43 years of being someone's big sister. And she'd gotten a text. We ended up in the cafe next door. 2 paper cups of tea, 2 uncomfortable stools, the noise of an espresso machine filling in the silences we didn't know how to fill yet. "She does this," Joanna said, running a finger along the edge of her cup. "She curates things. People, I mean. She arranges them the way she arranges her apartment. If you don't fit the aesthetic, you get moved to the back of the closet." "I drive a 2009 Civic," I said. "I live in the same house I've lived in for 30 years. I still have a landline." The corner of Joanna's mouth moved. "You are exactly the kind of detail she'd want softened." I looked at my tea. He could have said no to her. Yes, Joanna said simply, he could have. Outside, a delivery truck idled at the curb. Behind the counter, someone dropped something metal. Neither of us spoke for a while. I was thinking about going anyway, Joanna said, not looking at me. Not to cause a scene. I don't want to ruin anything. She stopped, started again. I don't think I should have to sit at home and wait to be let back into my own family. I thought of the quilt in the cedar chest. I thought of weeks ahead of explaining to people that I hadn't been invited to my only son's wedding. I thought of the version of myself who would stay home and be gracious about it, who would send a card and arrange flowers on the kitchen table and find something on television and not let it show. I wasn't sure I could be that person anymore. I didn't say yes, but I also didn't say no. That night, I took the quilt out of the cedar chest and spread it across the bed. The ivory and pale blue caught the lamplight. 8 months of evenings, of decisions about color and what love looks like when it's made by hand. I stood looking at it for a long time. I left it on the bed when I went to sleep, which meant something, I supposed. By Friday morning, I had convinced myself not to go. I made a list of reasons that all sounded sensible before noon. I was not the kind of woman who forced herself into spaces that had been closed to her. There was dignity in restraint. I wrote the reasons on the back of an envelope and put it in my coat pocket. Then, Joanna called. "I'm going," she said. "I rented a dress. My cousin's bringing me as his guest. The lodge allows it. I thought you should know, in case you wanted to come with me." "We've known each other for 2 days, Joanna." "I know, but I think I know you better than most of the people who'll be in that room tomorrow." A pause. "You made something for them, didn't you? For the wedding." I didn't ask how she knew, yes. "Then you should be there when they receive it, even if they don't know it yet." I held the phone. I looked out at the oak tree, which had gone fully orange overnight. "What time?" I said. Saturday morning, I moved slowly through everything I usually rush. Long shower, real coffee. I found the gray wool dress at the back of my closet, bought it 2 years ago for a friend's retirement dinner, worn exactly once. I put it on. It still fit. My mother's pearl brooch was in the small velvet box in my jewelry drawer, right where it always was. I pinned it at the collar and stood at the bathroom mirror for a long time. I had silver hair now and still wasn't entirely used to it. But the woman in the mirror didn't look like someone who ought to be home watching the news on a Saturday. She looked like someone with somewhere to be. I lifted the quilt from the bed, folded it carefully, and set it in a canvas bag. I wasn't entirely sure why, only that leaving it in the cedar chest felt wrong. Joanna arrived at noon exactly in a dark blue sedan. She wore a dress the color of a winter sky, and she'd done something composed with her hair. She looked more rested than she probably felt. "You look wonderful," she said through the open window. "So do you." I got in. "Let's go before I change my mind." The lodge was 2 hours north, set into the pines beside a lake, so still it looked painted. The parking lot was full of guests and expensive fabric, moving with the careful purposefulness of people trying to look casual about money. Joanna and I sat in the car for half a minute. Neither of us spoke. "We don't have to justify ourselves to anyone," she said finally. "I know. We're just 2 women who decided to be present on an important day." I picked up the canvas bag and got out of the car. The ceremony had just ended. Guests drifted through the main hall toward the reception room in the unhurried way that open bars encourage. The room was all pine, beams, and lake views, white flowers on every surface, string lights overhead like scattered stars. It was genuinely beautiful. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Then I noticed Adrian. He was standing near the bar with a cluster of friends, laughing at something. His suit was dark gray and he'd gotten a haircut. He looked like himself, and also like someone I was seeing clearly for the first time from a distance. The way you sometimes see your children when they don't know you're watching and you realize they have become entirely their own person, separate from you in ways you'd understood in theory, but not quite felt until that moment. He saw me approximately 4 seconds after I walked in. The laugh stopped mid-motion, like a film pausing on a single frame. Brooke found me before he did. I'll give her credit for that. She didn't wait for things to develop. She came directly through the room in a champagne-colored silk gown, moving with the precision of someone who had prepared contingency plans and was now calmly deploying them. "You came," she said, quietly neutrally. "I did." She looked at her sister. Something moved across her face, too fast to name. "Joanna." Her voice was controlled. "I didn't think." "No," Joanna said. "I know you didn't." Brooke straightened, fractionally. "This isn't the time." "Then we won't make it the time," I said. "We'll just be here." She held my gaze a moment. Then, with something careful in her voice, "I'd appreciate a low profile." "I'm 64, I said. "I'm always a low profile." Adrian appeared at her elbow before she could respond. He looked at me the way people look at something they'd prepared for but hoped wouldn't arrive. "Mom," his voice was measured, "you got my email." "I did." He exhaled. "I think we should." "You should go enjoy your reception," I said. "That's what you should do." "I'm not here to disrupt anything. I'm here because I'm your mother and I wanted to be present on your wedding day. If you'd like to have me removed, you're welcome to speak to the staff. But I think that would be more disruptive than my simply being here." He looked at Joanna, then past both of us, then back at my face. He placed his hand briefly on my arm, not quite an apology but something, and said quietly, "Come find me later," and he walked away with Brooke beside him. Joanna and I found seats at a round table near the far wall. No name cards waited for us. We made ourselves comfortable anyway. A young couple across the table gave us polite, confused smiles and didn't ask questions. An older woman on the groom's side, his great-aunt, it turned out, patted my hand before we'd even been introduced and said, "You look like someone who knows how to sit with dignity." I've always admired that. I thanked her and meant it. The boy appeared halfway through the first course. He was maybe 15, lanky, in a suit that had been sized for optimism, with the particular serious expression that teenagers wear when they're working hard to make sense of adult behavior. He'd been circling the perimeter of the room for some time before he stopped at our table and looked at me. "Are you Adrian's mom?" he said. "I am." He nodded, as if confirming something he'd suspected. "I'm Marcus's son. Marcus is one of the groomsmen." He sat down in the empty chair beside me without hesitation, with the total social confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned to be self-conscious about that sort of thing. "I saw your quilt," he said. I looked at him. "Pardon?" "In the bag." The zipper wasn't all the way closed. He pointed briefly toward the canvas bag at my feet. "My grandmother quilted. She passed last year. I know what a good one looks like." Something quiet closed inside my chest. "It's a wedding ring pattern," I said. He nodded slowly. "Did you make it for them?" I did. He looked toward the dance floor, then back at me. "Does Brooke know about it?" I considered how to answer that. No, I was saving it. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, with the particular unfiltered honesty of a 15-year-old who doesn't yet see the point of softening things, "That seems wrong. Someone should know about it." His name was Theo. I found that out a little later. He stayed at our table for nearly 20 minutes, talking mostly to Joanna about his school, a film he'd recently liked, The Lake Outside the Windows. When he finally stood to leave, he shook my hand like a small adult. "I'm glad you came," he said. I thanked him. My throat was tight in a way I didn't try to explain. The speeches began after dinner. The best man went first, funny and warm. Then Brooke's maid of honor, tearful and sincere. Then Brooke took the microphone. She was good at this. Her voice was clear, her pacing perfect. She thanked the venue, the vendors, her bridesmaids. She thanked Adrian's friends. She acknowledged his late father. That surprised me, the grace of it. Then she paused, and her eyes moved around the room with a particular deliberateness, and she said, "I want to thank everyone here for being part of the life I've chosen. I believe in being intentional about the spaces we build, the relationships we invest in, the people we allow into our story. You are all here because you belong, because you fit, and that means everything to me." She raised her glass, the room raised theirs. I looked down at the condensation ring. My water glass had left on the white linen. Joanna leaned slightly toward me. "She meant that for no one in particular," she said quietly. "She meant it for us specifically," I said, and everyone who heard it understood that. Neither of us raised our glasses. The evening moved on. Joanna and I talked between ourselves. Theo came back once to ask if we wanted cake. The great aunt came to say goodnight and hugged me with more warmth than I expected from someone I'd known for 3 hours. Then, Adrian came. He sat in Theo's former chair, jacket off now, tie loosened. He looked like a man who had spent all day making decisions and finally run out of the certainty that had made them feel possible. "I need to explain," he said. "You don't have to explain everything tonight." "Mom." "Adrian," I said it gently. "I know why you let it happen. I'm not sure you do yet, but I do." I folded my hands on the table. "She was embarrassed by me, and you loved her enough or wanted her to be happy enough that you decided I could absorb it." His jaw moved. "It wasn't like that." "Maybe not exactly, but close enough." He stared at the tablecloth. A long time passed before he said, "I didn't know how to fix it without making everything harder. So you made it easier by removing me." He didn't answer. He couldn't. "I'm not saying that to wound you," I said. "I'm saying it so we both know what we're actually talking about." He nodded slowly. "Then, you made something, didn't you? For us," Theo told me. He looked at the canvas bag. "A quilt." "Yes." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were steady but barely. "I'm sorry, Mom." All 14 lines of that email, and he hadn't found those 3 words. He'd found them now. "I know," I said. Joanna drove us home through November fog, talking about nothing urgent and everything important. Her plans for an apartment with a garden, her certainty that she'd spent too many years making herself smaller to fit her sister's definition of acceptable. Our headlights cut through the fog at a steady pace. When she dropped me at the curb, she said, "Same time next month? There's a craft fair at the high school I've been meaning to check out." I laughed, which surprised me. "I'll bring the coffee." The house was dark and quiet when I went in. I stood in the hallway without turning on the lights. Through the window, I could just make out the oak tree, all its orange now converted to black silhouette against the sky. In the morning, I boxed the quilt carefully and addressed it to Adrian. Inside, on a note card, I wrote, "It was made for you. Whatever comes next, that part doesn't change." I dropped it at the post office on my way to the grocery store. The woman at the counter asked if I wanted tracking. I said yes. I thought about what was worth tracking. Brooke came to my door 11 days later. No warning. She stood on my porch in jeans and a plain coat, looking more like herself than she ever had at that Christmas dinner with the photograph's centerpiece. Her arms were crossed, but not defensively, more like she was cold, which she probably was. November had settled in with real intention. I opened the screen door and waited. "I want to explain something," she said. "All right." She looked past me into the hallway, then back at my face. "I've spent most of my life trying not to be where I came from. My family didn't have much. My mother worked 2 jobs. Joanna and I shared a bedroom until I was 16. She stopped. Started again. I built something different. And I know that looks like I'm ashamed of people who remind me of ordinary things. But it wasn't about you being ordinary." "What was it about?" She was quiet a moment. The wind moved through the oak tree behind me. "It was about being afraid that if I let in too much, if the seams showed on one perfect day." She shook her head. "That sounds terrible out loud." "It does," I said, "but I understand being afraid of seams." She looked at me. Adrian cried when the quilt arrived. I hadn't expected that specific information. I hadn't expected it would reach me the way it did. Simple and human. The image of my son grown and married and crying over something made by hand in the long quiet evenings of a winter he'd known nothing about. "Good," I said. "It's a good quilt." Brooke exhaled. "I don't know how to fix this." "I don't think there's a fix," I said. "There's only what you do next." She nodded, carefully. I stepped back from the door. "Come in," I said. "I'll put on tea. It doesn't have to be a whole conversation. But you don't need to stand on the porch either." She came in. We sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes. We didn't resolve anything grand. She didn't suddenly become easy to know, and I didn't pretend that the ache of those 14 lines had gone somewhere it hadn't. But she told me about her mother, who worked nights, who Brooke had never known how to talk about in rooms that expected a different kind of story. And I told her about the quilt pattern, where it came from, how my mother had learned it from hers, How the double ring meant something specific about the way two people stay themselves even while becoming something together. She listened. I'll give her that. When she stood to leave, she paused at the shelf by the door, where I keep a few photographs. One of Adrian at around 10 years old, gap-toothed, holding up a fish he'd caught and was enormously proud of. She looked at it a beat longer than she needed to. He doesn't know I came here, she said. I won't say anything. She nodded, then she left. The November air came through the open door for a moment after she closed it. I stood in the hallway and listened to the quiet return. I thought of Joanna, who'd called that week to say she'd signed a lease on an apartment with a south-facing window and natural light all afternoon. I thought of Theo, who'd sent a message through his father saying I was welcome to come to the craft fair if I was interested. I thought of the quilt somewhere north of here now, draped over a bed in a house where two people were figuring out how to be married. I went to my sewing basket. I'd been meaning to start something new for weeks. A hexagon pattern, nothing particular in mind for it yet. Just the practice of beginning. I settled into the wingback chair by the window, threaded the needle, and began. Outside, the oak had gone fully bare. The branches made something beautiful against the winter sky. All that quiet structure finally visible, nothing softening or disguising the shape of what had grown there over 30 years of standing in one place. I had spent a very long time letting other people decide how much of me was appropriate for the room. I was finished with that particular arrangement. I was still here, still these hands, this chair, this careful and unhurried work. That was enough to begin with. And this time, I wasn't going to stop.